Okay, good morning. Very good turnout considering there was a social event last night. Obviously, it didn't go too late at the Brouwerhof. So, thank you, Daisy, for this wonderful introduction. It's truly been a privilege to know you this long, and it's really nice to have someone like this introduce you. I would like to start the time of my session by saying thank you. I want to say a huge thank you, and maybe you'll join me, to the organizers of this conference. And of course, as you, I'm sure, I want to thank them for making sure that we have this wonderful space to be able to share all of our ideas, our conversations, our dreams, our fears. But I'd also like to thank them for putting their faith in me and inviting me to give this keynote. Hopefully, it won't disappoint or horrify them, because they also have little idea what I'm presenting. And I think it's definitely very interesting when you get invited to give a keynote talk opposed to some of the other talks that you've seen during the conference, because as I'm sure the other keynote speakers will tell you, should have not let it go on sleep. As I'm sure the other keynote speakers will tell you, it gives you a vast opportunity to be able to really explore topics that you might otherwise not. And I have spent actually months researching and reading around this topic before putting together and crafting this talk. So I was actually really delighted to see the opening keynote from Laura and Andy, kind of touching on a very similar theme in a way to what I'm going to talk about. So I'm not traveling back in time to you from the future. I'm talking to you from today, 2025. But I want to also kind of take this time and space to think about how our collective futures are looking. And I think it was a really creative way to do this and get everyone warmed up. So I hope this morning you all have as much energy. I've hopefully had enough coffee and sleep to make it at least somewhat entertaining. So with that, I'd like to start by sharing some of my thoughts around how I see maintenance. Too far. So, maintenance is interdependence. It is not a system that stands alone. It's a shared property. It's stitched through many different people, different roles, different libraries, vendors, and users. And within this system, we very much depend on each other. We need different skill sets. We need different tools to be able to do these jobs, and when we put them all together, we recognize that our systems are more sustainable and our teams are much more effective. At the same time, maintenance is deeply personal, and we put a lot of parts of ourselves into the systems that we build and maintain, especially when our work is public. We open ourselves out and put including our own disorder into the world. I think it's therefore very important to also recognize the individuals in the maintenance work that we do. And as a small public service announcement, let's be very respectful to each other, and especially the maintainers and contributors that we have in our communities. Maintenance is continuous. It doesn't stop when we ship, and hopefully we already thought about it when we were building the system. It's often a kind of relay where it gets passed along from one developer to another, and it can create these back and forth dialogues that build both sustainability and resilience. But I think it's only also fair to say that maintenance can be a burden. Maintenance work can often be seen as undesirable or an afterthought, often adding the pressure or devaluation to those who favor doing this. I very much enjoyed Stephen's lightning talk yesterday, where he talked about documentation, and he was maybe a little surprised to find that not everyone is excited about it as he is, but we really need people like this in our community who drive these topics. Therefore, maintenance can also be a form of resistance. Carcani is a Scottish phrase meaning go slow or go steady, and it comes from slow down strike traditions that reclaim pace as power. In engineering, maintenance as resistance can mean refusing extractive velocities, pushing back on move fast and break thing culture, and enforcing things like error budgets, rollouts behind flags that can be paused, scheduling in tech debt into our sprints, requiring reviews, and making sure that documentation happens before deployment. By choosing deliberation over hurry, we can protect users, and we can also keep our systems trustworthy. In this sense, intention is the resilience. However, if we're not careful, maintenance can also drift into authoritarianism and exclusion, where order is prized over people, gatekeeping dictating what and who is valued, with rigid processes that masquerade as quality. Not every community can rely on a benevolent dictator, and as we've seen in the Python community, even benevolent ones don't scale. So we need proactively inclusion, clear governance, codes of conduct. As Marco told us in the keynote yesterday morning for the Narwhals community, these things are not optional, they are a baseline to ensure that we have rotating ownership, mentorship ladders, and accessible on-ramps for our community. The antidote to cohesive maintenance is shared stewardship, power that's legible, contestable, and distributed. Maintenance is stewardship. You might have heard engineers, or you may have been one such engineer that made the joke that this very small piece of code you're writing is only going to be in the code base for a very short time, so it doesn't need code tests, it doesn't need unit tests, it doesn't need documentation. I think we often know that that can be the code that lives the longest and normally outlives our tenure at certain companies. So it's very much important that we think about where our code will live in the future and who will be the maintainers. When we're acting as stewards, our systems and the communities around them become resilient, regenerative, and worth inheriting. So ultimately, maintenance is care. It's about being intentional with our actions and setting up our future selves and those who come after us to be able to thrive. It is an ultimate radical act of knowing that we are only a part of the system, but we have power to change. So why do I care? Why am I stood here in front of you on the stage? Okay, some of you know me, but I don't know many of you. And if we haven't met yet, my name is Jessica Greene. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm a co-maintainer of a code base as a software engineer at my job at Ecosia. But I'm also a maintainer of a community as an organizer with PyLadies Berlin and various other roles that I hold within the Python community. And I'm also standing here in front of you as a woman who is well aware of the social normative expectations held of me and who sees the impact that these expectations are having not only on myself, but also those around me. I transitioned into tech in 2018, and I don't have a traditional background, but both Python and the community have played a huge role in that journey. Throughout those years, I have been privileged to experience and discuss many of the challenges our industry and the world around us is facing, and I feel that we are in a pivotal moment, or pivotal period, not only in terms of the tech industry, but also the shift to generative AI outside of it, and also the societies around us. I believe that it's important, therefore, that we talk about the foundations of the work and the structures within we work and do research and studies that these are important technical implementations, but also points that we need to discuss as a community to ensure that we are creating inclusive spaces. This presentation is very much a collaborative effort. So it's been born out of many conversations, also with some of the people in this room. As I mentioned before, multiple months of reading, research, and listening to the experiences of those around me. And I was very much inspired by this woman, Mirle Lederman-Eukelis, who is an artist from, well, she is still an artist, but a big bulk of her work was done in the 1970s, looking at reframing maintenance as art. She found herself in a position where the requirements of society on her to perform care work meant that she rarely had the time to create art. But then she decided to flip the script and point the direction of what was art on the maintenance work that she was already doing. She spoke to many of the different maintenance workers around her, including a lot of sanitation workers, which was one of the images in my opening slide. And I think it's very similarly important for us as tech workers to question the structures and the reward systems that we have in place. So let's first zoom out. Hopefully this is not news to anyone, by the way, but we live in a time where financial capital has become the primary focus of our neoliberalism systems. And this has led, in many countries, to the ruthless dismantling of welfare states and democratic processes. I think we all saw this during the COVID-19 pandemic, where our capitalist markets in the global north and around the world led to austerity policies that significantly reduced the resources available for containing infections, which was already a known possibility in our modern world. And it left those who are the most vulnerable among our community without the necessary resources and protective equipment. As the CARE manifesto states, carelessness reigns. Moreover, they state that the neoliberal policies and the monster corporations that have been created have intensified an already existing inequality, both within the countries that we live and between the global north and the global south. This has simultaneously exacerbated environmental injustice and war, as well as facilitating the alarming ruse of authoritarian regimes with ultra-nationalistic rhetoric. The CARE manifesto is primarily focused on the UK, which is also where I'm from, but I think we see these things in Germany. And if you don't feel like you have noticed this around you, I encourage you to look further. And it isn't just political. It's also within our tech industry. We've seen systems trained on skewed data sets that misidentify faces, deny credit ratings, misdiagnose patients, and optimize for the default male because the missing data was never maintained. These are just some of the books that are telling us about the injustices that happen right now, today, from our technology, and actually most of them are already years old. And this carelessness is not by chance. As I mentioned, this is structural. It comes from the very structures that build our societies. These huge corporations, we can only say, at the very least, from apathy, for the vast majority of our society, have created these systems that further create inequality. Sarah Wynne Williams talks in her book about Meta in 2016. That's almost 10 years, or it's almost 10 years ago, about the decision-making at Facebook, which is now Meta, and we continue to see such decision-making happening now. This progress at any cost mindset is not good enough. It is not serving the vast majority of us, and we must recognize this. Many people may have read this article from really, I think it was last month, August. I cut the date off, but I'm pretty sure it was in August, around how decisions are being made now in regards to children and some of the most vulnerable people in our societies when it comes to AI. As technologists and researchers and students, we have some base understanding of how this technology works, but many of the people in our society do not, and they are ill-equipped to be able to deal with the fallout of impact from these technologies. And we're also seeing very bold claims made about white-collar jobs, which we can see connects to a broader attempt to wipe out the middle class and further widen this wealth gap. Very few people are profiting from these investments, and there's little plan on how to support the people who are already impacted. I know one of the questions for Laura and Andy in the opening keynote was, will I still have a job in 10 years? And I think it's a very valid question to ask. We are living in a time of uncertainty, but we must also see that this is already happening, and it is also happening unequally to those who are most marginalized already in our community. As Dr. Louise Faubourg tells us, the collapse of paid labor is not gender neutral. It begins where work is already undervalued and quietly restructured. Across industries and regions, women are overrepresented in the very roles that AI is being pitched or poised to automate. It's administration work, it's customer support, it's education, it's HR, compliance, policy, and healthcare assistant. These are jobs that make institutions run, but they're also the ones with the least protection, the least pay, and the least power. If we are entering an era where the value creation no longer primarily depends on human labor, and people like Altman and Gates are telling us these will benefit our systems, we must surely have some plan in place to support the people who will be impacted. The soothing narrative told to us ensures us that AI will turn everyone into a founder, but in practice, it is the platform which is scaling, and rarely those who are already marginalized. The share of female founders in Germany in the startup ecosystem has fallen in the past year. And to be honest, it's not very high at the start, less than 20%. And this is similar across Europe. This is not just a Germany issue. They also receive less funding disproportionately to male teams and mixed teams. And while there may be many cultural reasons why women tend to go into entrepreneurship later in life, we must also question these cultural norms that lead to an environment and how our current systems reinforce this lack of equality. So I would question, unless we're prepared to radically rethink how we're defining contribution and redesign our reward systems, how may we distribute economic power? This AI revolution will not liberate women. It can very possibly erase hard-won gains of gender equality from the past 10 years. And as Jessica Fern asks in her book, Polysecure, is it possible to feel safe and secure in a capitalist society that defines our human value based on what we do and how much we make, rather than who we are? Why is it then that forms of interdependence and care are continually devalued in this society? In the CARE manifesto, they suggest that one reason may be to do with how these opposing ideas have been gendered in the global north as historically male for autonomy and independence, and generally gendered as female for care and interdependence. And this isn't just hurting women. This creates, we see already that this creates an environment that breeds this creates an environment that generates groups of men who feel a pressure to display an authoritative manhood, which we observe in these modern extremist movements that idolize aggression and irresponsibility. We need to challenge these systems together. Defensive self-interest is thriving in conditions like this, because when our sense of security and comfort is so fragile, it becomes a lot harder for us to care for ourselves, let alone those around us. And with many reports now coming out that the generative AI pilots that have been run in the last couple of years are failing, and even AI leaders, such as Sam Altman, saying that they feel like the investments may be overinflated. We have to see the absurdities of this bubble which we're living in. Betting markets now collect bets on which AI model will outbeat the other, or which researcher will be hired by a specific company. This is a system which is fundamentally not supporting the people who have built it. It is fundamentally creating only capital gains for those already with money. But before I continue to take us maybe down a dystopian path, let's put our focus back to maintenance work and technology. As Euchaeus asks, after the revolution, who's going to pick up the garbage on Monday morning? In this age of AI, who are the maintenance workers who will continue to sustain and build the systems long beyond the hype? So first and foremost, we have to acknowledge that behind every model, there is often invisible data workers and moderators who have continued to fuel the training of large language models. More often than not only is this work invisible, but it's also outsourced to low-income countries without proper support for both finances, but also in terms of mental health. So it's vital as consumers of these systems that we not only recognize, but also amplify the voices of those demanding better conditions and resilience for the conditions within their work. This event, which you can use the QR code, hopefully it works, is at the Weissenbaum Institute here in Berlin. So if you're here during the next month, they have actually, I've been to one of their events already, very insightful. And this is a collaboration between the Data Workers Unite group and Super Labs. So I'm going to make a guess that many of us here are also writing software or code in some sense. And I want to take a look into the AI-generated code space. Since GitHub Copilot was released in 2023, GitHub themselves have reported that there's been a huge increase in the number of users. And this data actually, to be honest now, is already a little outdated because these things are moving so quick. But they're saying that they're seeing 12 to 15% more activity among developers who are regularly using it. Now, we must question what is the activity, but if we assume this is kind of more code going into the code bases, more pull requests, more commits, then we can see that there is generally an adoption. There's also been a huge surge in the number of contributions to generative AI projects, and overall in terms of the number of repositories that are being created. At the point of this report, GitHub were saying there was 1.6 repositories created every second. And they boasted a third of those were generated only in the last year. So we can definitely see signs that things have changed. And it's not only in open source or on GitHub. We're also seeing this in proprietary software. Here's the CEO of Microsoft saying that maybe 20 to 30% of all the code inside their repositories is written by software, so probably written by some sort of generative AI. And how many of us are having colleagues who enthusiastically open huge pull requests or add generative tooling to repositories these days, which adds certainly amount of burden for review. So what is this cost? What is the cost of such rapid development? Adrian, who I'm sure is watching from bed, so hi. And I mean, I'm not a morning person, so I get it. As Adrian succinctly shares, that in open source, this is creating even more pressure on maintainers, a group who we already know face burnout and overburden in terms of like the amount of resources and capacity that they have. So as these AI contributions flood into open source projects, where often folks don't understand the code that they're submitting and are unable, therefore, to follow up, we need better tooling. We need better ways to adopt and to be able to support these new ways of working, but we also need to make sure that the maintainers have the tools and resources to be able to do this in a sustainable way. Many open source projects are incredibly welcoming to newcomers, and it is a great way, if you're at the start of your journey or even later on, to get involved in the community and contribute. But the backbone of these open source projects is the maintainers who review, who triage, who keep the code running. And it's very interesting that we in the Python community, and Python as a language, have found ourselves extremely central to this AI shift. The rich ecosystem that's been developed for years, full of data science-related tools, and ease to write, has made this an excellent language for many of the tasks today in machine learning and generative AI. It's also one of the first languages that OpenAI offered their SDK in, and many of their tutorials are primarily focused on Python code. They also included an interpreter for running Python code in their ChatGPT product. The Python documentary, which is available to watch on YouTube for free, so you all now have an evening plan if you didn't watch it, explains the origin of the language, but also provides insights into why it's found such a position in this shift to generative AI. But is it benefiting from this shift? Some of you will already be aware that this month, the Python Software Foundation, a sponsor of this conference, had to pause their grants program. While we can see that because of this was also during the pandemic years where PyCon US, one of the major income streams for the PSF, was unable to run to the same capacity, and that now, post-pandemic, many events are coming back, it is still extremely worrying to see that this funding, which normally runs until December, just for clarity, has already had to stop in August. That means many conferences like this one and many community events will not be able to happen to the same extent that they may have before. And it is still unclear how we go forwards as an organization in these times. A lot of the conferences that are run or provided money by the PSF also promote AI and the tooling and the companies that are behind them. So I think it's only fair that we should be expected to see money going back into our organizations that have, after all, built the foundations for much of this technology. So with these new challenges, perhaps we require new solutions. But I would like to argue that for the most part, from what I have seen, the answer is maybe we need to pause and think for a moment, and that maybe, no, we don't need exactly new things to be able to handle these challenges, and that we have many of the tools already in our kit. We've already developed many programming paradigms that feel equally fitting for generative machine development. And while we figure out how to structure context so that our LLMs are able to understand our code bases and our business requirements so that we can make them more machine readable, we shouldn't throw to the wind many of the existing understandings we have of how programming works and what engineering looks like. And I mean this both in a direct sense, in terms of like how our code is structured and how it's written, but also in terms of how our workflows function and how we choose to collaborate. Python, for a long time, has had the Zen of Python, and I think this, for me, is an example of guidelines and structures. If you are not familiar with it, you can simply go into Python and import this, and it will print out this text. And I was also delighted to hear that Narwhals has a similar poem, I think, as Marco called it. But I think there's very good guidelines in here and things that we can point to, especially if we try to think that implementation that's hard to explain probably is a bad idea. If we use coding assistants that generate verbose and seemingly smart code, maybe we're not setting ourselves up for the most success and the best maintenance of the future. We also need to be thinking about the reward systems that we put in place. And while benchmarks of how LLMs and large language models and generative AI is able to perform, we also need to think about different metrics that counterbalance these. The Intima is a benchmark for looking at the interaction between AI and humans in terms of these companionship behaviors. And we see more and more people using generative AI in terms of like, a friend or a psychologist. So we really must ensure that they are set up in a way where we are measuring and holding the reward system for those who develop this technology to match those use cases. I really enjoyed Irina and Ole's talk yesterday where they discussed evaluation and the need for having domain experts as humans in the loop. And I think standing in contrast to this tech solutionism and accelerism, we also can think about pro-social AI. Pro-social behaviors, such as helping others, is a well-known enhancement to human well-being in societies. So then what differentiates the tech that supports a healthy connection from that imperils it? First, we need to design AI systems that prioritize human well-being, and they look at these kind of metrics as well as these ever-narrowing optimization benchmarks. We need to recognize that technology is amplifying the values and the intentions of its creators and question who are behind those. Second, we need to guard against agency decay. This gradual erosion of human decision-making as we become overly reliant on AI is something that should concern us all. While it might not be so bad to outsource some of the tasks, we really should think about what we want it to do. And I invite you during the rest of the conference to come to our booth and share those ideas with us on our PyLadies Empowered in Tech board. We need to think of this as a hybrid between the artificial and the natural intelligence. that we use the strengths of both and bring them together in a creative and moral reasoning. And finally, we need to develop this as a double literacy. We need to continue the journey of understanding ourselves and our social dynamics. But we also need to understand algorithmic literacy, comprehending how these systems work, their biases, and the limitations. So the path forwards really requires us to have a mindset of awareness of the current choice point, where we stand today, appreciation for the complementary strengths of human and machine technology, acceptance of our responsibility to shape AI's development, and accountability for ensuring pro-social outcomes. The first three industrial revolutions followed a predictable pattern, where technology, primarily driven by commercial interests, had social consequences, which were addressed as afterthoughts, some of which we're still living with today. We have the opportunity to embed already these value systems into AI from the outset, but that requires us to address the four interconnected challenges. And we should not just expect that the technology of tomorrow will be better than the humans of today. This responsibility lies with us. Another framework that I think is very relevant also for us today is the feminist tech principles, which is a set of guidelines broken into there's 12 principles, but they're broken into four groupings. Global, where it's focusing on the interconnections between humans, animals, nature, and the planet, because I haven't really talked about the environmental impact of AI, but I think most of us are aware of this. Societal, where we focus on the matters of communities, structures, locations, and economics, which I've touched on quite a bit. The interpersonal, when we talk about the relationships between each other, and also the self, where we focus on how we develop technology and what we want to see within it. I'm not going to go through all 12 because I'm kind of aware of the time, but I wanted to highlight 4 of the principles, which I think are particularly relevant. So tech solutions, hopefully this also is not new news to anyone, are not neutral, and they optimize the intentions of the people that have built them. The current systems are following political and economical models that privatize the gains in the hands of a few, and there are many social harms on the larger populations, but also to the planet. If we want to see a future that is perhaps a feminist future, a future that is inclusive for all, we need to center it around equality and sustainability. And it's crucial that we see that these are interlinked. We do not have one without the other. Supply chains are very important, and we already talked about the data workers that fuel a lot of the AI that we see today. But we must understand that we require transparency, but also fair supply chains that give us that visibility and help us build the equality the whole way back. We cannot continue to exacerbate these differences between the global north and south, and we must ensure that we are supporting the workers who have been most harmed by some of the recent AI developments. We need to sustain, maintain, and share. So we need to move away from these short-term innovation cycles and also think about how we can build in longevity and openness. I think this is going to be paramount for us to be able to create tech that functions within our planetary boundaries, but also that gives us the opportunity to all not just consume, but also collaborate. And the last one that I wanted to present was the need for empowerment over profit. So we need to not only think about tech solutionism, but we also need to think about how we can build tech that also helps the societies that we live in and the people around us. So this is not a done deal. Despite the uncertainty, we do need to remember that we are building the road as we walk it, or the tracks as the train goes, whichever kind of analogy you prefer. And as Dr. Sasha Luciona from Hugging Face reminds us, that we get to choose what comes next. It's not about resisting change, it's about shaping it. We're not going to go back to punch cards and like pre-industrial eras. We're probably also not going to go back to a world where generative AI doesn't play a large role in our careers. But we don't need to lose the valuable habits that engineering teaches us. We don't need to forget our respect for constraints, our empathy for our hardware, and keeping our code maintainable by someone else 5 or 10 years from now. So hopefully before I come to the end of my talk, I have already impressed on you, and if not, I hope to do so now, that maintenance is very much a shared responsibility. And I think this is certainly a very interesting time to get involved. We need to embrace and empower those who are already doing it, but we also need to incentivize more people to join this endeavor. I've been incredibly pleasantly surprised by the amount of women who have come to the PyLadies booth in the last 2 days and asked how they can get involved in the community, not only as consumers who would like to learn and benefit from our networks, but also as volunteers who want to give back and help build and shape the future. Thank you to all of those people that came to the booth. And I haven't been there the whole time, so I assume many more folks, including allies, also came and made these offers. But what I did notice is at the start of the conference, in the opening, when it was asked who is organizing local meetups, that only about 3 of us stood up. I see that as a huge room for opportunity. There are some fantastic communities here in Berlin, and if you're not here in Berlin, you have the opportunity to go back to wherever you're based and start your own. And we will help you. But it is so necessary to bring people on board with fresh ideas, particularly folks new, particularly folks who are at the start of their career and looking to shape the future of what comes. So Laura and Andy, you painted a picture for us at the start of the conference that showed maybe one possible utopia for where we might be going. And hopefully everyone is still awake and raring to go for the conference. But I would like to take, I guess, maybe 5 minutes. I'm not actually sure how much time I have left. To invite you all to collaborate on another reimagining of possible future. So I'm just going to awkwardly try and figure out my screen. But this is like basically a live demo of how to do a quiz. But if everyone has their phone, because I'm sure you all have them to hand, wants to scan this QR code, hopefully it's large enough. And essentially, I would like to ask you, what hope do you have for the future of maintenance in tech? And hope when you scan this, and someone can give me a thumbs up, you should see an input box, excellent, where you can put a word or multiple words. And I would like everyone to just take a moment to reflect on some of the points I've discussed, but also what your own ideas around maintenance are. And yeah, excellent, first one. Okay, this will keep going as more and more people add it, so I will leave it on screen, but I would like to take the moment to thank everybody for showing up this morning. Adrian, I even see you're in the room, so sorry for suggesting otherwise earlier. But I hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference days, and I thank you very much.
Thank you, Jessica, for this very thought-provoking talk and addressing so many issues that's been hanging in our minds. And now we'd like to take a few minutes to address any questions that the audience might have. Someone will come around with a mic.
If we don't have questions, I also have another one of these we can do together. I think there's someone at the back there with that. Yeah. And also, I kind of feel like, although we always say no non-questions, if you have some thoughts, it'd also be interesting to hear. If you don't want to say them on mic now, it's also fine to come and find me later.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that talk. Cory Doctorow has a nice quote where he says that AI is not good enough to replace you or at your job. But the AI hype is good enough to convince your idiot boss to replace you in your job. So it's nice to think that we need to have the people at the top of the pyramids hold them to account, like Sam Altman, whoever. What are your thoughts about holding the people, the decision makers at the bottom of the pyramid? What are your thoughts about holding them also to account?
I have to say, you know, I watched the other speakers say how hard it is to hear in this room. So I generally understood that you were asking about like there's kind of the pyramid of the people at the top who are kind of saying that this is going to take your job, and then there's many of us who are saying we don't think so because we can see what it actually does. What I missed was like the last.
So given the idea, so I'll speak a little louder then, given the idea that the people at the bottom, the decision makers, your boss, is the one who controls your future at your workplace, and that they are the ones that may be convinced that you can be replaced by some type of automation. What can we do to hold these decision makers to account instead of just the ones that are necessarily at the top?
Okay, understood. So just to repeat to make sure I didn't understand, the question is kind of like how do we convince those who are in positions of power above us that this technology cannot replace our jobs and that the value in what we're doing as engineers is still relevant. Cool. Yeah, so I think this is a great question. And for me, one of the things that I am personally trying to practice is not get too caught up in the hype myself, and also understand how this tooling works. So I think as engineers, it's very important, even if you feel strongly that you don't want to use AI-assisted tooling, that you make sure you take time to understand what it's actually capable of. And that will give you a lot more talking points for when you're having the conversations with maybe your manager or your CTO or CEO about what is actually possible. So I think a big part of empowerment comes from knowledge and understanding, and I think that's why it's also important that we have communities that support everybody in being able to understand this. I think the other thing is, in one of the slides I mentioned about maintenance can be resistance, and it's about being very persistent and voicing the need for ensuring that we are not just throwing things to the wind and continuing to maintain code bases and our agile practices or workflows in a way that is sustainable. So what I'm seeing and hearing from a lot of conversations is there's a lot of hype around AI assistance. I'm also seeing a trend towards if you're an engineer that uses AI or if you're not if you're an engineer that doesn't use AI. And I think these paradigms are not particularly helpful for us because it kind of divides us into these two groups. So I think what's important is that we understand the tooling But we're also very vocal at this point not to kind of feed the hype cycle more, and that we do so from this informed position to ensure that those in power understand the limitations. Because from my experience, a lot of people who come in and be like, well, we can just get an AI to write all of this, have not used said AI themselves.
Thank you.
I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that if you want to talk later. We're just going to make you run around the room, sorry.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. You had the slide where it said AI will replace like half of the people in the entry-level white-collar jobs. And if looking at especially like data scientists, data engineer roles, I think we're already there, if not even worse. Do you have any ideas how we can like fight this, change this, support those who are currently towards the end of their studies or beginning of their career? To make it easier for them to like get into jobs, to find these places. So what's your thought on that?
Yeah, okay, so the question, as I understand it, is around what we're already seeing, and I would agree, that many of the entry-level jobs are just not there anymore, and that it is increasingly difficult as someone new into the field to be able to find employment, and how do we support those people to be able to find positions of employment, but also to be able to train into these roles. So, I mean, I think my first point would be always say yes to hiring the junior. That we can always find reasons why maybe that's not particularly the budget that we need to spend at the moment, or that we don't perhaps have the capacity to support someone more junior in our teams. And I think actually we have to be very persistent in how much value juniors bring, and a little bit less cautious around whether we can really provide suitable environments for them. So when I got into tech, it was, like, I'm not going to say easy to find a job, but there were at least a lot more initiatives and a lot more companies offering entry-level roles. And the vast majority of what I learned was on the job. And I think that's probably mostly true for most people, right? Like, you can learn how to write code, but how to work as a software engineer, it really requires you to work in a team and on a collaborative code base. So always say yes to hiring the junior. And if you're in a hiring position or you have any say in the budget, promote the idea that we need to include budget for junior hires. In terms of, yeah, I agree. And I don't think it's such a radical idea either. But in terms of like how we support with the training, I think it's very interesting. So I remember also around the time that I learned to program, there was this meme about the difference between junior and senior engineers. And it was basically how much you know how to do a Google search, right? And I think that's kind of still true, but like now with this assistant, generative AI assistant technology. So a lot of people that I speak to who are early on in their careers, what they're doing is they're seeing us as practitioners use this tooling, and then they're trying to apply that themselves. But they don't have the domain expertise to fully understand the outputs. So much like when you're doing a search on whatever your favorite search engine is, you need to kind of have some understanding of what the keywords are to be able to look that up in the first place. And I think these are the foundational skills that we really have to instill in people who are new to our industry. So I wouldn't discourage you from using the tooling, but I do think that you need to take time to be able to understand what it's giving you. And I think we, as practice experts, so in the field, so to speak, have a lot of responsibility to support people coming in.
Hello,
Hi.
and thank you. The slide you had about the percentage of startup founders who are women particularly interested me, and I think it's roughly over the years we're somewhere near 20%. And from my own knowledge and doing a quick search, I believe about 20% of computer science students are women. And then doing a further search, I think a much lower number, maybe around 10% of people actively publishing computer science related research are women. So something I would put out as a discussion point is, would it be useful if computer science, as well as many other domains, in the degrees and in academics and in publishing research, were more diverse and more representative of a woman, and what could be done to accomplish that? And I would, one college I would point to, I believe this is the name, I may be getting it wrong, is Harvey Mudd in the US, with I believe a woman leader at that college, very quickly got its computer science percentages up to about 50% or to majority women. And I know that's not the only route to getting more women as startups, but I do believe that having a more diverse, and we could go by women, by race, by all sorts of other categories, but having more diverse representation in computer science would be useful. And I myself am a very non-traditional data science student, and I have had a whopping 0 woman instructors and 1 woman teaching assistant in my program.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think it isn't just at one layer, it's at every layer. And of course, a lot of these metrics are very binary when it comes to gender, unfortunately, because that's how a lot of data collection happens. But of course, it's also not just a women and men thing. And I think we have to also start looking even earlier, even before schooling, even I remember at high school, and I will age myself a little bit now, being told by my physics teacher that he didn't really understand why I was bothering and I should go back to art class because I was a girl. And I recently had a work experience, a person come work with me, and she told me a very similar story that she had experienced, considering that this is now 25 years or not 25 years, or yeah, quite a while in between these two experiences. I was very disheartened to hear that these rhetorics are continuing. And I think this is the thing, is it's very much a societal issue as well as something that exists in our specific tech industry. So I think when you ask how can we change this, this is where we have groups like Empowered and Tech and PyLadies, and you can support those initiatives to help more people find their way into the tech industry, but also stay, because also traditionally a lot of women actually leave the industry as well. So it's not just an inflow problem, but also about who stays around. Yeah. Definitely should not have it. It's a security feature, right? To turn the screen off after so long.
Hi. What's your hope for the future? Do you have a utopian outlook for the future for us?
Okay. I like that question. Can I answer it in a slightly different way? I don't know if I have a utopian outlook for you, but I will say I think progress is a challenge and it requires many epochs. And while it is pretty disheartening, to be honest, to see how things, not just within tech and AI, but also the broader society, are changing, I feel like this is probably a necessary requirement for us actually to continue to move forwards as humans. And we mustn't forget that like the last years have been incredibly challenging in most of our societies in terms of like the pandemic, but also in terms of economic crisis and how we are communicating with one another, the further widening and extremism of politics. Makes it feel kind of like a dystopia, but I think we have to see that this is part of the progress of change. And I think with that we're at time.
We have one more question that someone submitted. The inequalities you mentioned in your talk are also deeply reflected in the cloud hyperscalers like Azure, AWS. Do you have any suggestion how we as a community can fight back here?
Can I read that question? Sorry, it is very echoey in here. I'm going to read it as in terms of like the company behind the cloud hyperscale. Hopefully that's correct. And I guess it's in terms of like when they are the foundations and providers of our technology and it's already like so ingrained there, how do we possibly kind of push back against these concepts? And I think it's a big question for all of us, right? In terms of like, how much do we rely on the existing structures that we have today and fight within the system? And how much can we look for alternatives where we are able to like kind of pick based on our value systems who we choose to work with and what we choose to build on top of? And I don't know how long we have, but I don't know. It's definitely not a short answer. So I think like we already see a lot of people that work in these companies pushing back and striking. And I think striking and making sure that you have structures within your company that support not only employee rights, but also like the choices of companies to work with certain other organizations is very important. And is very important at any scale. But I think it's always going to be a balance of like the impact you can have versus the choices that you make. So it might be that you're a small team and you have very few opportunities to not work with one of these large cloud giants, right? I think a lot of people are in that scenario. It also makes me think, and I don't know if the person that wrote the question also thinks about this, but how many people are calling OpenAI API for prototypes, which at some point, I guess, they intend maybe to move to a self-hosted system. But we have to understand with that the power that we are giving these companies and the monopolies that they're building, and that it's very intentional from their side, right? Like this is a proven business model of why we now see court cases against Google and against Meta for the monopolies that they have built, and that they like just push any competitors out to the side. So where possible, we should try use alternatives. We should try look for things like Greene PT, which is a ChatGPT alternative that uses smaller models and hosts on Greene servers. And where it's not possible, we should push these providers to give us more transparency on, for example, the energy usage data that they should have. And that we make sure that there's regulation going into place to be able to support this. And not only that companies do this when they feel like it's a nice marketing campaign, but also that it is part of their obligation within our industry.
Well, thank you, Jessica.